This meeting is being recorded.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Rabbi Cohen, thank you so much for being with us again. It's great
Such
to
an
have you.
honor.
I'm going to just turn it right over to you.
Okay, so can you make me co-host so I can share my screen?
Yes, you are. You should be able to share.
Okay,
Well,
so
yeah, go ahead.
we'll see how it goes, right? Hold on to your hats, people. So first we'll say the blessing over Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirishana b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And then you can say amen at the end of that, and then you get credit like you said it yourself. So no worries. Okay, let's see how
Amen.
there you go. And let's see. Okay, so this week, well, that's not perhaps the best adjusted. Hold on, let's do this a little bit, and then, well,
That looks
now I
great.
lost. Probably now I lost it altogether. Yeah, actually, that's not what I wanted to share. Let me try this again. I am going to stop it.
Hey,
It's
AC.
loud. I'm going to try this one more time.
No sweat. Sherry and Rabbi and everybody else, thank you for organizing these Torah studies. I know it takes some effort and resources, and the Temple Aaron diaspora appreciates you.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that, Susan. I'm just glad you're here. Glad you could make it.
Higher screen layout. Well, we'll have to use this because this apparently is what I've got right now. I was hoping to be a little more something. And let's make this bigger so I don't know about you, but so I can read it. So we are in Parshat Hukat, which is somewhere in the middle of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers gets its name from the fact that there are several times in the book when God commands Moses to take censuses, right? To take a census of all, usually it's of the adult males between like 20 and 40, but there are a lot of census going on, and so it's called the Book of Numbers. In Hebrew, it's called Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness, because that's where we are. Just a couple weeks ago, um, we had at Parshat Shlach Lecha, we sent 12 spies in to spy on the land, and they came back, and two of them gave a good report about what a wonderful land it was, and that was Joshua and Caleb. And the other group of 10 the group of 10 spies came back and was like, wow, everything is really huge. We look like grasshoppers. They're going to kill us all. God was not pleased with the fact that the community got very frightened and said, we're not going. And so then that generation of adults was destined to die over the next 40 years in the desert. Um, Now we get to pick up um, where we left off, sort of. So we have just before this in this parsha had a long discussion of the red heifer. There's a whole ritual around finding a tamim, a perfect, a unblemished red heifer of 1 year, and then you kill it and you mix and you burn it and you mix its ashes and whatever and all sorts of things. And then that's kind of liquid mud kind of thing made from the ashes of the red heifer are then what you use to purify people after they come into contact with tuma. After they come into contact with what what would we call tuma is like ritual impurity. We no longer have the red heifer because we don't have the infrastructure, right? We don't have the temple in Jerusalem on which to alter whatever. So we, all of us, whoever we are walking around with bits of impurity inside of us. But the rabbis linked that discussion of the red heifer to this first verse of Numbers chapter 20. The first verse is, right, the Israelites arrived in a body, or all at the same time, at a kol ha'edah, a community at the wilderness of Zin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Also, interesting word, right? Kadesh being the same word as kadosh. Um, you find that, um, right? You find that in the standard blessing form, right? Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, um, who has made us holy with your commandments. Asher Kiddishanu. Okay. The people stay at this wilderness in Kadesh. Miriam died and was buried there. So Aaron has died sometime earlier, not that much earlier, and now Miriam also dies. Um, there's a whole, well, I'm sorry, Aaron hasn't died yet. Miriam's the first of the big three to go, right? Aaron, Miriam, and Moses are siblings. And what it then says is that the community was without order and they joined against Moses and Aaron. So, as I just said, that kind of what we would call juxtaposition between one set of a story or a law or just even two verses, when they're juxtaposed like that, the rabbis want to know what's the connection between them. And so, what is the connection between them? Anybody? Yeah? All right. Well, okay. So here we go. I'll start with this piece of commentary for you. It says, what's this guy's name? Oh, okay. Gersonides said, the Ralbag, who's a medieval commentator, he says, I think that Miriam, in her wisdom, must have drawn people to serve God. It is as if the Torah was telling us that had Miriam not died, the people would never have quarreled with Moses. Moreover, Moses and Aaron would have consulted her when God told them to speak to the rock and not hit it, since she was both a prophet and their elder. She would have kept them from doing, and I quote, anything stupid. Right? So you have, if I want to be a really annoying feminist for a moment, right? You got three people in charge, and the woman's the one who's going to prevent the two men from doing anything stupid. I think that historically that has been the case. I think that at present, I definitely need people to help me to prevent me from doing things that are stupid. Okay, so then we had us there without water. So Rashi says, we learned from this verse that they had water for the whole 40 years from the well on account of Miriam. So do y'all know the story of the well? Miriam's well? You may not. There's this whole idea. So I'm a little trouble with my computer, so you have to just trust me on this one. But in Pirkei Avot, right, which is the ethics of the fathers, right? And traditionally we read Pirkei Avot one chapter at a time between the 7 Shabbatot, between Pesach and Shavuot. And here's one of the pieces from chapter 5. And Pirkei Avot says this: 10 things, Asara Devarim Nivru Be'erev Shabbat Bein Hashemashot. 10 things were created on the eve of the Sabbath at twilight. And here are the ones that there are, right? So God is like sticking in these final little miracles into the very fabric of creation. The first is the mouth of the earth. So the mouth of the earth um, came from, here you go. Right, so the mouth of the earth was from last week when we read Parshat Korach, right? And Korach and his buddies all get together, right? They rise up against Moses and Aaron saying, who put you in charge? Aren't we all holy? And ultimately, Moses says, look, I'm going to stand over here with my rod. My brother's going to stand over here with his rod. You guys stand over here with yours. We'll see which one the Lord favors. And not only does the Lord favor Aaron and Moses' rods, Moses says essentially, if they are correct, if I am correct, and I'm supposed to be leading, and you guys are supposed to be following, let something happen to the Korahites, Korach and his band, that has never been seen before on earth. And so the mouth of the earth here, this first one, is when Moses says that, and God opens up the earth. All of the Korach and his band disappear under the earth, and the earth seals back over. It's not the same as an earthquake, because an earthquake, right, doesn't just disappear, right? You're left with all the horrible things that happen in the wake of an earthquake. This specific mouth of this was apparently created, already foreseen, which is one of the things that's interesting. Like God already foresaw that the Korahites were going to be a problem, and God lets them be a problem anyway. The second thing created on the eve of Shabbat was the mouth of the well, and this was Miriam's well. The idea in the rabbinic literature seems to be that the well, from the time when we first got water in the wilderness at the well of Marivah, right? Moses hit the rock, water came rushing out. And then that well followed them for 40 years in the desert in their wanderings, right? So we already know that's miraculous because wells don't generally, move. But after Miriam dies, the community no longer has what the rabbis call her merit in order to be able to have the well. And so the well disappears, and then then the people are like, hey, we got nothing to drink here. This is a problem. And as we know, if we've followed the Jewish people through the Bible, we are a really difficult bunch of people to lead, right? I mean, it talks about in the Torah, the languages, we are a stiff-necked people, which can be good when you're holding on fast to something good, but wrangling a group of Jews in the desert for 40 years, that's rough. That's rough. Um, when I saw these pictures, I don't know if any of you did. I don't know if any of you saw the pictures of the new Pope's brother holding up a newspaper saying his brother's been named Pope. I just don't really tend to think of a Pope as having siblings. Um, and I was thinking about it because while not all the time, there are certain moments when the Pope is infallible. And I have to tell you, I could not take the pressure of having to be infallible. So, all right. The next miracle is the mouth of the donkey. So, right in our next parsha, in Parshat Balak, right, we have the king Balak comes to Bilam, who's a prophet of some kind, and say, please go curse the Israelites. And they're like, okay, we could do that. He says, God says, no, don't go. They ask him again. Finally, Bilam agrees to go. And as he is going to overlook the Israelites and then, pray for them, curse them, right? The donkey like smushes his up against the wall and he beats the donkey over and over. What's wrong? Move. You've always been a good donkey. And then the donkey says, I I come from God. God doesn't want you. God said, will give you the words to say. Um, and what I like best about that story is that the first thing out of Bilam's mouth is not, you can talk. All these years you've been my donkey and you can talk. Anyway, that said that story was going to happen. Number four is the rainbow, right? So most of us, I don't know that we really think about like a word like rainbow. We hear it, we can picture what a rainbow looks like, but we don't really parse it. So after the flood, God says to Noah, I will never again destroy the world by water. And he puts his mark in the sky. So we're going to take the two words and separate them. One is rain, and it's the rain, it's the moisture in the atmosphere that allows us to see a rainbow. But a bow is something you use in archery, right? When you go like this, and then you let the arrow go, and hopefully you hit a target of some kind. Well, the bow, when I'm using my bow, it's angled like this, right? But God takes the bow and he like turns it around. And so the bow actually faces from earth up to heaven. So if it's like, I mean, deal, but it's like somebody saying, well, I do in fact have a loaded pistol, but I'm going to hand it to you. And I'm going to hand it to you with right, the scary side pointed towards me. Or even just the way we teach kids to hand scissors to each other, right? I'll hold on to the scary part. You can get the safe part. So the bow and the cloud is sort of not just a flood, but God won't make war against us again. We certainly hope that's true. The fifth miracle was the manna in the desert that followed us all around, right? And there's all sorts of pieces in the Torah that talk about what manna was and what it tasted like. Several times it's described as having the flavor of coriander seeds. I don't know if that's good or bad. Some rabbinic commentaries say pretty much the manna tasted like whatever you wanted it to taste like. There was a wonderful commentary last week that noted that people were afraid of the manna at some level because the manna apparently was completely, and I mean completely, absorbed into people's bodies, and so there was no waste. There's no peeing and pooping, and that some of the people in the wilderness were worried that they would consume so much manna over time and not excrete anything that they would blow up. Right? Like if you've ever, sort of like been really constipated, I guess, and then suddenly, I don't know. Okay. The sixth one is the staff of Moses. Moses, our buddy, uses that staff in a lot of contexts, right? He takes it with him to Pharaoh and turns into a snake, and then it turns back into a rod, and then he helps us get water with it. And of course, it's a shepherd's crook because Moses is at heart, or at least for a period of time, was a shepherd. Okay. Then there's the shamir. The shamir is a kind of worm. It's a magical worm. So that when God talks to Solomon about building the temple, and David too, but Solomon gets to build it, God says it has to be made of unhewn stones. That is, you can't take your axe or whatever would work and straighten out the edges and make it all easy into blocks that will fit into one another. You have to take the stone as it is. So the shamir is this little worm kind of creature, and it eats rock. And so when the rocks didn't fit well together, the shamir would come and take a little off of this edge over here, or a little indentation there. And so the rocks of the temple, the stones of the temple would fit together. We don't have it anymore. The letters is number 8 and the writing is number 9. So the letters are just that, right? The letters of Aleph Bet, but the writing speaks to an issue that they have, which is that the rabbis believe that the Ten Commandments were given so that they could be read on either side. But even if you don't believe that, if you picture, say, a samach, right, which is round, samach looks just like a circle. And there's a samach in the middle of the Ten Commandments. And if I cut out around, all the way around, then that middle part that makes it a samach and it's going to fall off. So there's certain miraculousness to the nature of the way the words hung onto the stone commandments. And finally, the tablets themselves, which is, and as we know, we got 2 sets of tablets, right? The first set of tablets is when Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, hangs out with God. God hews for him 10 commandments. He comes down. The people are dancing around a golden calf. And Moses smashes the commandments, goes back up. And this time God says, hew them out for yourself. So now a person hews them, brings them down. And then what happens is that as they get ready to travel, we are instructed to not only put the tablets of the covenant, right? The Aseret Dibrot, we put not only the tablets that are still whole, but we also put the dust of the tablets that were smashed. And we put them all together inside the Mishkan, inside the tabernacle. There's a lovely lesson to be learned about ourselves and about community. What does it mean that we can take those who have become ashes or stones, or frankly, like most of us, are just plain broken, and we don't throw you away just for being a little broken, right? We take you along with us, and the goal is in a community. If we're lucky, we can be strong in places where someone else is weak, and we can get support in places where we need help, all of that. Okay, and then I have a friend of mine I study Talmud with who's convinced that Jews don't know how to count. So like the number 10, as you know, as you can imagine, number 10 is a special number. Why? Probably because it's this, 1, 2, right? You have 10 fingers, 10 toes. Is a typical body. So after they give us those 10 miracles, it says, and some say also demons. Oh, wonderful, right? So God creates these forces in the world, really are more like the Satan, which is not so much a demon as a sort of a prosecutor or a provocateur, right? Which manifests itself to us as the Yetzer Hara, right? As the impulse to do evil, just as we also have an impulse to do good. If all we had was an impulse to do good, there's really not a lot of credit, because then, if you're never attracted to a certain sin, that's easy. If you're really attracted to it and you don't do it, then you've really done some good moral work on your own part, right? My husband and I have been married over 30 years now. Wow. And he has spent years and years and years trying to find vegetarian sausage that I'll eat. And I was probably 20 years into the marriage before I fully processed this, and said, because I didn't grow up in a kosher home. And I said to him, Ben, my love, when I was a young woman, not even young, when I was a kid, and my parents would put like pepperoni on the pizza, I would pick it off because I didn't like it. So it doesn't matter how close it is to the actual pepperoni, I don't like it. Um, so that's a sin, just by the way. That's I'm not it's not that one's not hard for me. Ick. Or if you're raised in a more observant household, so my child, my daughter, for example, was raised in we keep kosher, and she was raised in a kosher home. When she was about 10, she was in my study on the computer. She had some class project where they had to like find different but comparable restaurants and like compare nutritional values or anyway, I was downstairs in the kitchen thinking about dinner and I hear her go, ew. So I came running upstairs. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "Did you know there are people who put cheese on hamburgers?" She thought that was the most disgusting thing ever. Um, which also is the other thing, right? Mama, why do you know all the Christmas carols? Well, I was educated in the public schools and in Minnesota. I learned all the Christmas carols. Um, and it's so interesting, right? To see what our assumptions of what we bring into the world. Okay. Some say the grave of Moses, right? And they make a big deal about the grave of Moses not being known, right? He goes out to Mount Nebo at the end. He looks out over the horizon. He can see into the promised land, and then he dies. And it said he dies by al pi Hashem, by the mouth of God, sort of like with a divine kiss. He never makes it into the promised land. And the wisdom of not knowing where his grave is probably useful because it would be very tempting to make it into a shrine and into sort of a magical thing, which I'm not good at magic. Okay, some say the ram of our father Abraham and Isaac, right? What happens as they're climbing that hill to go up for the Akedah, for the binding of Isaac? And Isaac says, "We have the fire and the and the wood and the hatchet. My father, where is the lamb for the slaughtering and for the sacrifice?" And Abraham says, "The Lord will provide, my son." And so this is where grammar could be helpful, um, which is just to say that my daughter has really, really strong feelings about grammar. In her spare time at work in Grand County, she has been known to rewrite their contracts for spelling, grammar, and consistency. Um, this is what makes her happy. So good, right? So if we believe that Abraham is saying, the Lord will provide, comma, my son, but it could also be the Lord will provide the sacrifice, my son. That is to be, you're about to be sacrificed. Um, Isaac, who's a kind of passive figure in the Torah, in a lot of contexts, kind of says, okay, and they go on together. But it's wonderful. He looks up and there's a ram. And instead of Isaac, that's what happened. And then the last one I shared because it's my favorite. And some say God also made tongs. So tongs as in, things, right? Like we in fact had our ritual corn on the cob last night. We used the tongs to put the ears in and out of the, right? But they're thinking more like blacksmithing kind of tongs that you really, but that, and if you see the commentary, it talks about, well, yeah, how could they have made tongs if they don't already have another set of tongs with which to hold the tongs while they're making the tongs? And so you have all this kind of mystical, these miracles that were meant to be, and the way the story folds out, and then you have and the tongs, those would be good too. So that that's our complete diversion into Pirkei Avot, which is okay. So what happens, you ask? Well, you know, what happens is, is fine. I am indeed. And what do? The people quarrel against Moses. they say if we had perished when our brothers had perished, in the instance of God, right? And the instance of God, when that happened, is really probably disgusting. The 10 the 10 spies who come back from the land, but there's also the bunch who died, um, who died because of various rebellions. Last week we had a bunch of people who died because they were upset about their diet. I mean, like people die in the hand of God all the time in this community, which is hard. Um, right. And Rashi says what it means is not at the same time as our brethren, but in the same way as our brethren, because you say they would rather die of something like plague or pestilence because dying of thirst is really bad, which is true, right? Um, and I'll go back to Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra says the notion that a well followed the Israelites around the desert on account of the merit of Miriam is somebody's midrash, right? It's somebody's story. If such a miracle had occurred, why doesn't it say so plainly in the Torah? Uh, Instead, we're told he split the rock in the wilderness and he gave them drink as if from a great deep, as in Psalms, right? He says the inventor of the Midrash based himself on Miriam's well on the juxtaposition of verses 1 and 2, but that's no proof, he says. He says they're two separate events that happen at the same place, and so that goes on. It's kind of its own kind of fun. I like that sort of imagery. Um, I like the imagery when the different commentators tell each other that they're stupid. That's a wrong comment. You're like, oh, okay then, let's do that. Okay. Why have you brought the Lord's congregation into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die there? Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place? A place with no grain or figs or wine or pomegranates, and there's not even water to drink. So everybody is really unhappy, right? But this is an ongoing discussion, right? Every time they get freaked out about something, the people in the wilderness, they're like, why can't we go back to slavery in Egypt when we had figs and pomegranates? And in some very real way, the answer to that is being a free person is hard, right? Having agency is hard. And we recognize that we recognize it surely on the one hand with our children, and if you're blessed, grandchildren, if you're really blessed, great grandchildren. But right, the things that they cling to as having been good, or the things that they're willing to sacrifice for the sake of a chocolate chip cookie, right? As we get older, we're like, well, no, we may just be eating manna out here in the desert, but I'm not a slave anymore. I own myself. I get to make my own decisions, right? That's what the July 4th was partly about, right? Was an assertion of we're being, we all learned the no taxation without representation thing, but it was a young country with some pretty big ideals, even if it wasn't living up to them. Right? There's something very ironic of the pieces of including, slavery as okay, even as we note that all men are are supposed to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so the people who wrote that, both at the same time, believed that and believed no kings, believed we should govern ourselves. And many of them also had slaves whom they saw as less than. And I think that, people like to quote Martin Luther King about how the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And in some ways, it could be helpful for us to look back the other way, which is to say, um, which is to say, look at where we were and then where we are now. On even on issues that I'm very concerned about under this administration, which is all I'll say about it, it doesn't mean I can't say, wow, look at the progress we made on these issues and on these issues and on these issues. And so we are, in fact, you know, it may be two steps forward and one step back, but slowly we learn how to self-govern. Slowly we learn how to not be little snotty kids who are mad at God every time something doesn't go their way. Slowly we kind of embrace our free will and say, okay, I'm out here. A friend of mine just had cataract surgery a few days ago, and that was fine. And I, um, I prayed for her, and then she also got a good surgeon, right? Do both. Do both. Kind of the belt and suspenders attitude towards life. How about that? I don't know. What do you think? Um, yes. Oh, thank you. Yes. Okay. So, all right. So now they're upset. And because of where we are with time, I'm going to read this, right? Moshe and Aaron came away from the tent, the congregation, the tent of meeting. And they fall on their faces. This is a ritual falling on your face, not an accidental. The presence of the Lord appeared to them, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, you and your brother take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus shall you produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for congregation and their beasts. Okay, so what's different here? So the first time, 40 years ago, when Moses went to get water for the first time back in Exodus, God says to him, take your rod and strike the rock, and water will come forth. Here, that little thing is missing, right? Here it says, take the rod, assemble the community, and order the rock to yield its water. Right. So instead of going pow at it, you're supposed to stand next to it, holding your, right? That's not what happens. I mean, that's not what they do. Which I guess is kind of troubling. And I'm not going to read you every commentary because we want the next verse. Um, so, oh, sorry, missed it. Yes. Thus you shall produce water from the rock and drink for the okay. So goes on. So Moshe took the rod, okay, from God as God had commanded him. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock and said to them, listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of the rock? And then Moshe raises his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. All right. So, does anybody see any problems here? In which case, speak up.
Well, the first thing God told Moses is to speak to it.
Exactly. And
But Moses also, go ahead, Rabbi, go ahead.
No, go for it.
But yet Moses said, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine God's like saying, Moses, a moment with you now.
Uh-huh.
If I was in Moses now, I'd say, oh, just one? Uh-oh.
Right. This can't be good, right? Right? There's both those ends of that. Both And I have this theory that I can't really back up, but that Moses goes, "Oh, the rod, the rock. We did this before. I know how to do this. I'll just hit the rock and out will come water." Whereas here, it doesn't tell you to hit it. It's not like I want to say, miracles always don't always happen in the same way twice. But the other thing is exactly that. Two other pieces of the language. He says, "Listen, you rebels," right? Which I'm sure is what Moses is feeling at the moment. Nevertheless, um, Pnei Hasela v'yomer alehem, Shamuna Hamorim, you rebels. Shall we get water for you out of this rock? And the thing is that on the one hand, um, it seems really problematic. He hits the rock he's not supposed to. He takes credit that he and Aaron made this happen when they didn't, right? And yet the water still flows from the rock. So as far as the people are concerned, they're happy. This is great. Listen, and for they might even want to say to themselves, look, for a change, we're not the ones in trouble. Moses and Aaron are in trouble. Which I don't know. If you grow up in large families, that might be kind of how people group in different ways. Remembering distinctly a conversation with my sister, younger two. I think Sam was like 5 and Isaac was like 2.5. And my sister is scolding Sam about something. You need to behave yourself. And from Isaac comes, I'm being behave, right? No, you need to behave. I'm being behave. No idea what it was. But here we have. Okay, so out came water. Everybody drank. Excellent. And there you go. Now it says, but the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm the sanctity, my holiness, right, in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, meaning that the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, through which God affirmed God's own sanctuary. Okay, so a couple of pieces. Rashi, our buddy, says, why does he hit the rock twice? And he says, the first time it only produced a trickle because the Holy One had told him to order the rock to produce water, not hit it. But they had spoken to the wrong rock and it produced nothing. So then they thought maybe we have to hit the rock like we did the other time. And the rock they now struck happened to be the right one. And I just like the imagery of that. They hit the wrong rock. The problem was not, right? They were like, and I at least would think that if they were having trouble getting water out, they would be more angry, they would be more vicious, there would be more pounding because they're frustrated. And in some ways, all they have is each other and their spouses upon which to lean. Okay, so, but Rashi then goes on to say, which is what's so sad, right? The text tells us that had it not been for this one sin, they would have been able to enter the land. Because otherwise, the people would have said Moses and Aaron were condemned not to enter the land by the same degree did the rest of us in the generation of the wilderness. That is to say, we were afraid to go in and take over the land, and God said, okay, you guys are all going to die in the wilderness, and it's your descendants that will enter the land. Right? In fact, he says, Moses' doubting power back in 11 was worse than striking the rock, but he was treated leniently there because it took place privately. So in some ways, this gives us this other piece, which is to say that we hold our elected or our appointed divine our appointed leaders, whether it's divinely or through human action, once you are a leader, right, what you do matters more. You are a role model. And that could be the role model of being the president of the United States. It can be like when my daughter was in fifth grade, and they had Hebrew lunch buddies with the kindergartners once a week. And it made these big 10-year-olds feel very grown up. They would have a little lesson plan. They would, right? You can lead from so many contexts, but if you want to accept leadership in a public context, then your your small mistakes are going to look bigger, right? They just are. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I sense both. Um, I don't. But like for example, I don't swear almost ever, like almost ever at all. And I never did a lot of swearing. But when I entered rabbinical school, I stopped swearing because I was going to be a rabbi. And when something bad happens, sometimes you fly back to your instincts. So there was a story about it's like 15 or 20 years old. It might be apocryphal, but that at one of at B'nai Chabara, the Reconstructionist congregation in Denver, on Yom Kippur, they had a teen who was laming, who was reading Torah, and she messed up and went, "Oh, F word," right? Oops, right? Oops. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be a rabbi. I'm not going to let that happen, because that would be bad. Um, on the other hand, when my daughter was, and so as my daughter was growing up, our line in the sand was, if you want to use that kind of language with your peers, that you're welcome to, but you can't swear at all in front of adults. And by the end of, because of the mixture of her class, she could swear in English, Hebrew, kind of Aramaic, Bukharian, and Russian and Spanish, and never in front of me. And so at one point, when she was in college, I was like, "What's the password for this website?" And she wrote back, "I'm really sorry, Mama," because it had an obscenity in it. And I'm like, "Say you're 20 now, so it's all on you." Anyway, but so this being kind of the idea of you're going to sanctify God, right? So we have that concept in two ways, right? We have people who died al Kadush Hashem, right? People who die to sanctify God's name. Um, and people do this in a number of contexts, but you see this like some of the famous stories during the Crusades, for example. The story of the Unatana Tokef, right? The prayer we do at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur was supposedly written by Rabbi Amnon of Mainz. And Rabbi Amnon of Mainz was a prominent leader in the community, and he got called into by the secular government, and they said, "You need to convert or we're going to kill you." He said, "Can I have a couple of days to think about it?" And then he got home and was horrified that he's even considered it. And so they came back for him, and it was, I mean, the imagery is sadly a little bit like Monty Python, because like they cut off his arms and then they cut off his legs, and then he died, but he created this piece, this liturgical poem, which is ultimately it's a embracing of life, right? All of these scary things happen. You think people are going to die in different ways, people are going to have hardship in different ways, but God will be with us. And all you have to do is turn back to God, and God will accept you. So traditionally, we have this idea of pekuach nefesh, right? So you can, aside from the three big commandments, which is to say, you can't, right, one God, no idols, and no adultery. But aside from those, if you need to eat non-kosher food for your health, go for it. If you have an eating disorder and you need to not fast on Yom Kippur because it's going to set off a whole cycle for you, then it's a mitzvah to eat because it's saving a life, except for those big three. Now, on the other hand, though, there's also dying and or committing acts that we would call Hilul Hashem, which which is the opposite of sanctifying the divine name, right? Right? It's shaming the divine name. It's making it bad. So, for example, much of the Jewish world, we're all old enough to remember this. Like, do you remember how the Jewish world gasped in shame when Bernie Madoff was outed? And we all went, "Oh my God, and he's a Jew?" Like, no, right? So there's this, so like sometimes you are then faced with the choice, right? If I'm the leader of a little shtibela in a shtetl someplace in, you know, 18th century Poland, and the leader comes to me and says, "Eat this pork, um, or I'll kill you." I might eat the pork, even if it's a Chalul Hashem. If eating the pork will then signify that my whole congregation is no longer Jewish, then you can't do that. And so, kind of what it stands for. But in this context, what Moses and Aaron did was a Hilul Hashem. They did not follow what it was God wanted them to do, and thus they didn't sanctify God's name. It went the other way. Um, and there's right. So this is And so ultimately, this is the story of the waters of Meribah, the waters of contention, because the peaceful well that had followed them all those years kind of disappeared, and God had to bring it back. But in the moments of bringing it back, um, they lose their own chance, right? That one thing changes how their lifetime is going to come out, which in some ways is very, very, well, in a lot of ways, it's very, very sad. In some ways, we think, okay, they're the leaders. They were supposed to know what they were doing. That's a just punishment. And in other ways, we might think, with all they put up with from everybody, and then suddenly this. And that is why partly this story is just is a hard one. Um, Crucial because it allows us to know why Moses and Aaron aren't going into the land, but nevertheless painful. So that's what I got for you today. When God tells you to speak to the rock, don't hit it. And then I guess what we invite ourselves to do is to figure out what that would mean in any given context, right? Because the major way that we kind of incorporate the way we incorporate the Torah as a living document is often by metaphor and analogy, right? Because our lives don't look kind of physically the same as they did in the Bible. So then we have to figure out, what does it mean where, right? On the one hand, some commandments get really expanded, right? God says, don't boil a calf in its mother's milk. The Jews are like, okay, so we won't eat dairy and meat together. God says, no, don't boil a calf in its mother's milk. And say, all right, so I'll get two sets of dishes, one dairy and one fleshing, and another two sets of dishes for Passover. And God says, fine, if you want to do all that, I give up. I just wanted the little, you made it big. But there's other places where we do the opposite. For example, with shatnez, right? So shatnez is a mixture of wool and linen that you're not allowed to wear. And it's one of those commandments that's given for no discernible reason. It's just given. And I mean, I just look at what the tag says. I know that in in like very firm circles, people who actually go to shotness checkers to make sure. But the thing is the shotness, not mixing wool and linen, kind of comes alongside other agricultural laws and other laws that are all about how we don't mix things. You don't pull your cart with an ox and a donkey, right? They're not the same strength. You don't pull the plow with all sorts of whatever. You don't mix certain kinds of growing things together. And at the time that the prohibition against shotness was issued in the Torah, those were the only two kinds of material they had, right? They had wool and they had linen. Today, we live in the era of absolutely magnificent fabrics. Soft, right? Cozy, easy to wash. And nobody has interpreted shotness to mean you can't wear a nice cotton poly blend, right? They've kept it small. So in this context, we try to figure out what was the problem here? And what kind of analogy does that make to my own life? Do I assume that God is going to work a miracle for me instead of putting in my own hard work? Am I taking credit for somebody else's thing? Am I too easy to anger? There's a lot of different questions you can take from this question. But the final thing I would say that you can take from this is that Moses and Aaron did this, and this was the sin for which they had to die. And everybody dies, but before they went in the promised land. But it is still not what they are known for, right? Like this happens, but when we think of Moses and Aaron, we don't think, oh, yeah, they messed that up with the rock and the water. We think Moses and Aaron, they laid us out of Egypt. Look at all the plagues. Look at all the ways they put up with us in the wilderness. And in a different context, but people will often talk about, especially when there's no, people will talk about how, for example, perhaps when someone's in prison, that they shouldn't have to be judged on the worst thing they ever did for the rest of their life and never be able to make something up. And I'm not sure about prison reform and blah, 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 but I think that question is good. Sometimes we do things that are really good, not good. And how do we live a life so that we do not have to constantly be judged by the worst thing we ever did? And we can say that to one another too. Like I said at the beginning, we give people a little grace for a little bit of time in terms of coming online. Surely we can do that to the people in our lives. So there you go. Thank you for listening to me babble at you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Did anyone have questions or
Questions,
Yes,
comments?
I do.
who's
I have
speaking?
questions.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
The Torah says you do not boil the kid in its mother's milk.
Uh-huh.
It did not say calf. It said kid. It was
That's
talking
true.
about a goat. Therefore, in the Sephardic religion, your Sephardic rabbis say you can eat hamburgers with cheese on it because
I have
that's
never heard that.
yes.
I mean,
That's there.
because in the Ashkenazi tradition, it's the opposite. We, for example, in the Ashkenazi world and the Mizrahi world, we believe that chicken is meat, even though chickens don't nurse, right? So there's
Another
no
Sephardic say no.
right,
You can have
right.
cheese with chicken. It's not that kind of meat.
Well, and I was going to say is that what you can discover in the Talmud, you see over time, first how chicken becomes meat. And then there's an effort to see if maybe how about fish? Because fish is your main protein. Like we can make a dinner with where fish is your main protein, right where the steak would be, right? And the people were like, no, we can tell the difference between meat and fish. So fish is parv, fish is neither. So, But let's be real, we get away with a lot, you know.
Well, it's kind of also like I'm a Neohite. Therefore, I can do a lot of things the Jewish people can't.
Yeah.
But yet I follow the same rules. But my ancestry was Sephardic Jews.
Yep. And it has a different tradition.
Yes. Like you came on and said, Good Shabbos.
Uh-huh.
We say that in Spanish. We use the same words, but it's buenos shalom. Good shalom, you know.
Oh, right. I was going to say, and good Shabbos is Yiddish, right?
Yeah, that comes from another language.
Right. Good. That is the Eastern European language is
Right.
Shabbos, right? Not modern Israeli either. Modern Israeli, it's Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
So
shalom.
different communities like that. All right. Well, I'm going to let people go. Be sure to take a Shabbat nap, and all will be well.
Rabbi, thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for hanging in there with me, folks.
Enjoy the rest of the weekend, everybody. Thank you for
Okay. Take
coming.
care.
Bye-bye.
Very much.
One other thing I have to say.
Oh.
Are the prophets, Elijah said, we can go to the, like, if your parents are not Jewish, or let's say your cousins are not Jewish, and they have a temple, they have a service in the church, you can go also, but not pray to their God. But for a Jew, it's strictly forbidden to go into the house of idolatry.
Right.
But you can go if it's not to cause a problem. And that came from where he told the soldier, who went to him and says, what am I going to do? The big generals and everything says, I have to go attend this service. And he told him, go with my blessing, but you do not necessarily have to pray to that God, but you have to show up not to cause a problem.
Yep.
Like your life.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a good example. All righty, everybody. As I said, be sure to take a nap. You'll be good.
That sounds like a good plan.
Thank you.
Enjoy
Shabbat
the rest of the
Shalom.
weekend. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.